Hello, everybody. I assume people are going to be trickling in for a few more seconds. But welcome to this meeting of Carpinteria Birdwatchers for May 2025. We have a very special meeting this month. We have a special guest. Linus Blomqvist will be here in just a minute. Well, he is here, but he'll be here on camera in just a second. And he will be talking about How I Bird, which is hopefully going to be a series of meetings where we talk to different birders about their own approach to birding. And I'll talk more about that in a second. First, some quick announcements. This Saturday, which will be the 17th, 18th of May, I think, at 8 a.m., we will have a Carpinteria Birdwatchers outing at Santa Monica Creek in Carpinteria. There's details about that at the carpbirdwatchers.org website, so I hope to see people there. Spring migration is well and truly happening. You know, there was some talk that it was sort of slow getting going in terms of some of the migrants this year, but it's definitely in full swing, or even kind of getting towards the tail end. Black swifts were reported for the last few days up at Refugio, so that's an exciting spring development. And then one other piece of news I just want to share because I think it's so cool and I can't help myself. We have nesting snowy plovers at the mouth of Carpinteria Creek down on Carpinteria State Beach, which has been something that's happened over the last several years. This year, there have been 2 nests so far, one of which unfortunately has failed and the eggs were removed. The biologist determined that the nest had been abandoned, so she collected the eggs. I'm not sure if those eggs actually went to the rearing facility at the Santa Barbara Zoo, if they were still viable or not. But one nest, as of at least the last time I was there a few days ago, remained 3 snowy plover eggs and an incubating mom. And there was a photo on the cover of the Coastal View News today showing the snowy plovers nesting down there at the beach. So I certainly encourage anybody who's a fan of the snowy plovers to go down there and keep an eye on them from a respectful distance. If you see people, walking dogs, which they're not supposed to do, or, flying drones, which I think they're also not supposed to do, those both are things that freak the plovers out. So, maybe have a little conversation, say, hey, have you heard about the snowy plovers? My experience has been that if you approach it in a positive way, everybody loves snowy plovers. Everybody's willing to reform their behavior for the benefit of those birds, and they need all the help they can get. Okay, so with all that said, we'll get on to the topic for tonight. So How I Bird with Linus Blomqvist. So Linus has been in some of our meetings before. He was here in particular to talk about his ABA big year that he did not last year, but the year before. Linus is nodding, which was very impressive out there crossing the country, counting birds. Linus is a PhD candidate in I've already forgotten, the environmental economics at the Bren School at UCSB. So he's does that for his day job. Don't know that much about that. But I do know about Linus's birding because he's very active in the local birding community. So when Linus actually suggested this as a topic for a series of meetings, and I said, boy, that's a fabulous idea. And can I draft you for the first meeting, which he generously agreed to do. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and invite Linus up. He is prepared to talk about how he birds. I guess I should talk a little more about the topic. So the idea is that it's certainly for me, the longer I bird, the more I come to realize that everybody approaches it differently. Everybody has their own things that motivate them. And some people are really into listing and getting their number higher and competing with other birders and getting in the, higher ranks of the eBird top 100 listings for their area, or in a, grander scale for all of North America or the ABA area. Others are motivated by different things. A lot of people are more casual. A lot of people are interested in particular kinds of birds. When I got into birding in a more serious way a few years ago, something that surprised me was to learn that, actually, every group of birds and every different kind of environment, birding that environment or birding that group of birds is its own separate discipline that you can learn about. And that I, went on my first pelagic birding trip, and I was an absolute noob at pelagic birding, even though I'd been birding for decades. So I do find it just really fascinating to talk to other birders. and hear what motivates them, what they've learned with their own particular approach to birding. So that's what this series of talks will hopefully be about. And again, I thought Linus was a great person to start with. And in general, I think the main takeaway that I would hope to convey about the topic is that there's no right or wrong way to bird. You can be a really great birder at the particular niche that you're into, and that's great. Or you can be a very casual birder, and that's great too. You can bird however you want, and that's one of the great benefits. I think that's one of the best things about birding, is that you can sort of adapt it to whatever your interests are and your own personal style. So with all that said, I'll invite Linus up again. Linus, are we good to go? All right, so in a few seconds, you will see Linus.
All right.
Oh, let me assist with the sharing process.
Oh.
That's not obvious. So you are set. And then up here, you kind of want to hide the meeting controls, maybe. So that's the little dots up there. On the far right, the 3 dots, which says more.
Oh,
That's going to let you hide the meeting controls, I think. Yeah, hide floating meeting controls. And then click on that. There you go. And then you can ring.
okay. It's good to be here. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about my own approach to birding, which has evolved over time, and you'll see a little bit why in a second. John asked me to include some photos, and I thought I'd throw in some completely random bird photos at first and try to come up with a message around them. In this case, this being like, it doesn't matter what your approach to birding is. I think we all just think birds are really cool. So like at the end of a day, if you see a greater prairie chicken, or a crested caracara, or a Bohemian waxwing, they're just great experiences. And you can take any approach to your birding if it's sort of your anything from bird feeder to traveling around the world. And I think we all have very similar reactions and connections to these birds. I started, well, John mentioned starting birding. I have no memory of starting birding because both my parents and especially my dad were birders. It's me and the red sweater in the middle and my dad just below. So I was sort of born into a birding family. My dad was a co-author on the first field guide to seabirds in flight. This edition is in Swedish, and then there's a newer edition in English too. So I have been at it for quite a few years. I've taken long breaks in between, but yeah, it goes back quite a ways. I've had a chance to bird in a few different countries. I started out in Sweden, where I grew up, traveled a little bit around the Mediterranean and some other places in South America, but I think by now, actually, most of my sort of cumulative birding experience is really here in California. So last time I was here, I talked about my big year in 2023, and I think it was in maybe February of that year. I was planning a trip. I'd sort of decided that it would be a good idea to go to Florida in March and just kind of get some of the species I needed there, and then have another go at it in like May or June, but giving it two visits in order to get the species I needed. And I was talking to Dave McQuaid, who's a notorious big ear birder, and who also lives in Florida. And I was saying like, hey, I was asking for advice. Like I said, my general approach is I like to just go to places with lots of birds and, just the best birding places you have. And I'll go there and I'll see what I find. And maybe after I've done that birding, I'll figure out what I'm missing. And he says, no, that's not how you do it. You need to know what you're looking for. You need targets. And he's like, send me the on eBird you can find like your target list birds you haven't seen. So you can say like birds in Florida in March that I haven't seen in the Bay Area this year, or something like that. So he said, send me that, and then we'll have a plan for the really difficult ones. And that's all you go for. All the other species, like, you're going to get anyway. So have a detailed plan for those top 10 or 20 targets that you have. And that really like changed something in my birding, I think. And even after the big year, I think of it as like most birding I do is like has like a flavor of a mission. So I like to have a plan. I plan ahead. I know that I'm looking for a particular target, or I'm targeting a particular habitat. It's not just the sort of being out there, but an entire sort of set of planning and strategizing around it that makes it, to me, that makes birding for me more exciting than just walking out and seeing what I discover. So much of it, my birding I do now is I will have like, it could be just one species I'm looking for as a target, or a handful. Those are based on the right season, habitat, weather, all sorts of other things. But there's not that many times now that I go birding without like knowing something about what I'm looking for. Another part of my approach, which is related, is I really like going to areas that aren't really visited as much by other birders, and I'll talk more about that later. And the only form of like quasi listing I do these days is my list of self-found birds. So bird like species that I found myself, as opposed to that I've chased down that someone else has found. And I'll get back to that too. So the photo here shows a sagebrush sparrow, which is a good example of having targets by season and habitat. So credit for this originally actually goes to Alex Kessling, who had sort of theorized that there would be sagebrush sparrows in Cuyama Valley. He'd heard about reports from LA County and some other places near-ish the coast where this bird, which is otherwise rare, I think before last winter, there's only 2 or 3 records in Santa Barbara County. So Alex thought, maybe, you know, if they're in LA, maybe they're here too. And what would be the best habitat for that? I helped out with a little bit of it planning, and we hit the area in Cuyama Valley that we thought would be most promising for sagebrush sparrow. Again, like there are no official reports of sagebrush sparrow from Cuyama Valley, and really just like one on Santa Barbara Island and one from Santa Maria or something like that in the county. So we went in, I think, November, which would be the good time of year, found the right habitat with the right vegetation, and went there and found a sagebrush sparrow, one that Alex found. And then I went back to Cuyama a few weeks later, and I'm like, okay, this time I'm going to find my own sagebrush sparrow. So I looked at a lot of satellite imagery. I'll get back to that. Thought long and hard about what areas are public, and crafted my plan for how I was going to find a sagebrush sparrow. And this is the result of that. Another example would be, so this is a Lapland longspur. Probably 1 or 2 years ago in the winter, I went to Cuyama Valley essentially thinking I will spend as much time as it takes in the flats out in the agricultural lands there to find a longspur. I have said that multiple times and on multiple occasions not found a longspur, but on that particular occasion I did find one. This photo is actually taken in Alaska, so I'm cheating a little bit because my photos from Cuyama are terrible. They're also not quite as pretty in winter as they are in summer. But that gives you a flavor of kind of how I think about birding. So I use various tools like I don't know what the percentage is, but a decent share of like the time spent with birding related activities happen with at the planning stage for me. So one thing I do is I'll go through like the list of this illustrated checklist from eBird and looking at, okay, what would be an interesting species that occurs right around this time, like this week or these couple of weeks. What's something interesting that like peaks around this time, or like, so if I was going through this today, I'd go, okay, the next 2 weeks are going to be good for black swift. So that would be something to target and go on and try to find. Apparently full of whistling duck is we're past the season now. So, so I do that. I use Steve Caldwell's BirdView a lot. This particular view that you have here is species I have not seen in Koyama, and the box is in the way here, but this gives me like the most likely birds that would be new for me in Koyama, and you can hover over on the website and see where they've been found, and you could craft your strategy accordingly. I make a lot of use of satellite imagery overlaid with land ownership maps. So this is actually, you can see the mouse, whoops. This stretch of habitat here between the agricultural fields and the mountains is very like scrubby habitat that's very suitable for sagebrush sparrow. And that's where Alex thought we might find one. And then I kind of looked at all my maps and said, okay, well, this part here is actually owned by Bureau of Land Management. So why don't we start by going there on the public land? So that's how that plan took shape. I look at the weather and especially winds quite a bit when it looks like this, and we have something like south or southwesterly winds. I get excited because sea watching is one of those things that I consider, it's not an underbirded area, but it is like an underbirded sort of approach to birding, or underbirded set of birds, really. So this is a black-legged kittiwake. Again, I've cheated because my photos from Santa Barbara from sea watching are awful, so I'm using my photos from Alaska of these birds. I go to Kola Point and also Point Conception. Usually I'm the only one doing sea watching, but I see a lot of stuff that others don't see that way. I've had many kittiwakes. I actually checked today and I've had about 20 white-winged scoters sea watching in Santa Barbara County in the last few years, which is probably more than most other people have seen. It's just something that you put in the hours, you get those sorts of birds. Some of the other highlights from sea watching, and I should emphasize that getting things like this requires a lot of patience. I had a black-footed albatross from Colo Point and a flesh-footed shearwater from Point Conception. And then I'm very partial to Koyama Valley. Love birding there. It feels like a little adventure every time I go out there. Very few people. There's really not that many visits throughout the year. John is actually one of the most active birders out there, I think, with the most checklists. But this is like, some people have our local park as their patch. Koyama Valley is kind of like my patch. It's a very big patch, but that's like my happy birding place. And I'm very interested in like status and distribution of birds in Koyama Valley. So even finding a bird that's common elsewhere but rare in Koyama Valley means something to me, and it's something that I appreciate. Lots of birds out there that you don't get so much if you only bird on the south coast. So we have mountain bluebird, California condor, bell sparrow, black-throated sparrow, ferruginous hawk, and burrish sparrow, all birds. Actually, this is sort of a emphasis on winter birds here, but some of them you can see around. And nowadays I get condor on a pretty good fraction of my visits to Koyama Valley. The last time I went a few weeks ago, I had a condor. they're out there if you look for them. And then, so Cuyama Valley is a favorite area. Another area I target myself, and in part because not so many other people go there, is the really high mountains in Santa Barbara County. So this photo is from San Rafael Mountain. I was very excited last summer to do, was essentially the first summer survey of breeding birds at San Rafael Mountain since around 1990. There's lots of fun, very like high altitude montane species breeding up there in the 80s that we know of, but since then there's just almost no knowledge of their status up there. I went up, I found dusky flycatcher, which was fun, but also could not find many of the other ones. But that's like felt like a meaningful contribution to our understanding of birds in Santa Barbara County. Plus you get sunsets like this. The smallest of my patches is Halama Beach, which I really enjoy birding, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of other people that think it's that promising, but I think it's really great birding. And this is my list of, or a little bit of the list of my self-found birds. Again, as I mentioned earlier, like pretty much the only listing I don't really do county listing or year listing or anything else these days, but I do keep track a little bit of the list of self-found birds. So an X means I have found the species myself, and something in bold are species I still haven't found myself. I have no idea how I've managed to not find a summer tanager in Santa Barbara County, but somehow I don't bird in the right habitats, presumably. So that gives me the bold species in bold gives me like ideas for birding I want to do going forward. And then the final section here is like partly about things I do that are birding related that don't involve actually looking at birds, which takes up quite a lot of time. But the message I wanted to convey here also is just these are ways for me to kind of give back to the community. I've gotten a lot from the community, and I try to do things that put something back into the community. So one thing I've done is build various web apps for bird-related things in the county. So like a web version of the book Birds of Santa Barbara County, tools for eBird reviewers, a web app to see data from the breeding bird study and the Christmas bird count, like statistics from the Christmas bird count. I've been a pretty active member in the campus chapter of the Audubon Society, Goleta Coast Audubon, organizing the field trips there for them for a few years. I'm a county editor for a place called Birding Hotspots, where it's like a wiki for hotspots for descriptions of how to access, how to bird, what birds to expect, and so on. And I've written a large number of entries for that website over the years. And then I do the Cuyama bird surveys, which you probably received one or more of my email blasts about it. And I've been a coordinator for the Christmas bird count for a couple of years as well. All right. That's it. Yeah.
Thanks, Linus. Good. If you can stay there, I think I'm gonna kind of smush in, and we'll do a little joint talk here. Let me stop the screen share for a second, although we may bring it back. And I just want to encourage. I have a few questions that I wanted to ask Linus that I thought of as he was talking, but I certainly encourage anyone in the Zoom meeting share questions via chat. I think I recognize all the people in the Zoom meeting. I think Tom does too. I think if someone has a question, they want to like unmask and enable their video and join the meeting publicly, you're welcome to do that for them, Tom. But again, Thank you. One specific question I have for you, Linus, feels weird. Like, am I talking to the screen? Am I talking to you? And I see now this piece that I've always kind of wondered, like, okay, so you are famous for many things among the local birding community, but the one thing I think you are most famous for, at least with me, is your almost magical ability to detect and identify birds at great distances. And I have run into more than one other birder who I haven't like told in advance, like that I have this feeling about your abilities. And they go, wow, I was birding with Linus and, he was picking out little specks on fence posts, 10 miles away. It's amazing. So I think I have a better understanding now watching your presentation. Like you learned, I'm going to believe that you learned this like before you could talk because you were there with your dad and he's like an author of this book about seabird identification. And you're out there birding. I mean, the seabird, the land-based seabird identification is sort of necessarily very long distance birding. And I just wondered, do you have any advice for someone who did not, not lucky enough to have that upbringing, who wants to be better at identifying or even just recognizing that the birds are there, these birds at great distances, and not just at sea, but on land as well? Because again, you're talking about you go to Cuyama and you usually you more often than not, you get a condor out there. For all my visits to the Cuyama Valley, I have yet to see a condor from the Cuyama Valley. And I'm going up there this weekend for the survey and really want to know, how to see a condor there. So what advice do you have for me in particular, or just anyone about distant birds?
Yeah, I think it's true that I probably got some of that ability before I could walk. I remember there's an instance when I was probably 4 or 5 and I pointed and identified the heron that we have in Sweden at like a couple of miles away, just based on like the way it flew. And my dad was like, "Oh my God, how did you do that?" But I think, well, 2 things. One is to find them, like you have to actually sort of believe that you can see something at that distance. So like the last time I went up to Koyama and had a condor, you could not see that with your naked eye. But I thought, well, this is a good spot for a condor. I'm just going to scan up and down and left and right over the sky with my binoculars and see if I find something. And it's a pretty small speck. But if I hadn't thought that it would be possible to spot a condor and identify it with I had to use my camera to be sure about the ID, I wouldn't have even like tried.
Yeah.
So I think that's one key. And then to learn how to identify things at a distance, I would say like start by identifying birds by plumage, the really clear things like colors and marks and all that kind of stuff at close distance, but try to like pay attention to the way it flies or the way it behaves, structure, things like that. Like I think it was Ken Kaufman who advised, like, how would you identify this bird if it was all white or all black? Doesn't matter. Like if it had no color, how would you identify it? So I would just pay attention to that when you see birds that you've identified in a different way, like in a more obvious way. And then the next time it's like 100 yards further away, maybe you can still ID it by plumage and really clear marks, but maybe a little fewer. And then you rely a little bit more on the sort of structure and impression. And then you push it little by little further away. And the basis for identification shifts a little bit away from plumage over to the structural things that are more obvious at a distance. I think that's the way to do it with sea watching, for example.
Yeah, and I guess you have to have that basis of identifying the bird at close range to be confident initially of the identification. And then you just kind of have to work your way out from there because, I can see a speck, at 5 miles out to sea and think, oh, maybe that's a sooty shearwater, but maybe it's not, maybe it's a cormorant. And if I haven't had the practice of distinguishing the two at like 100 yards and 500 yards and 1,000 yards, like, you need that basis of experience, and you need to know the status and distribution to know what is expected out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very much. I mean, the way I started with sea watching when I was maybe 10 to 12 years old, I didn't actually own a spotting scope. So I would go to where the sea watching was happening. Sea watching is much bigger in Sweden than it is here. So if it's a promising day, then there's going to be a group of people out. And they'd all be, so they'd be there. They'd all use their high magnification spotting scopes. And I showed up with my binoculars, and I was looking at the same birds. I saw them much less well in my binoculars, but they were telling me what it was based on what I saw through the spotting scope. And the only thing I could see was like structure and flight in my binoculars. So that's the hard but very fruitful way of learning it, actually.
Yeah, so we should just force birders to go out to these sea watches with only binoculars and.
Well, so I relied on others for the sort of positive ID in those cases.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit analogous to having ID'd at close range yourself, and then pushing it out to further distances.
And I mean, there's nothing stopping a birder from doing that, right? I mean, you can look at a distant bird with binoculars and form an idea of what it might be, and then maybe get a closer look with a camera or a spotting scope and an idea it that way. Okay. Boy, there's just, and now I'm a little bit stumped because I've got you, I could ask all these questions and you can't escape. So about the Kuyama bird survey. So how often, like those are happening a couple times a year now, is that right?
Yeah. So there's a winter survey in January and a spring survey in May.
Okay. And that is, in fact, this weekend is the spring survey.
Exactly. Yep.
If somebody is inspired by your eloquent discussion of Kuyama birding, is there still a chance for people to show up and participate in that?
Yes. Yeah. They can get in touch with me or via you and sign up. We definitely have areas we could cover.
Okay. Well, I will be out there. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not going to require you to find a condor and share it with me, but if you happen to find a condor, I'll be very interested. Something else that again, because of this thing that I've noticed about how different birders are motivated by different things, I find it really interesting that, I mean, maybe apart from your ABA big year experience, or in fact, even including your ABA big year experience, because you didn't sorry, I should get to the point. You seem very or relatively unmotivated by chasing. Like you are not out there going to see a rarity that someone else has found typically. At least I don't notice you doing that.
No.
And in your ABA big year, you were basically not chasing down rarities. You were going to see the birds in their expected locations and just trying to get as complete a list of those birds, right?
Yeah. It doesn't excite me to chase birds. I could have had many more county birds by now if I tried, but I typically don't. Yeah, I just typically don't chase things. It doesn't. I go there and I'm like, yeah,
it's just not worth the effort.
And now, like after the big year, I've seen them all elsewhere too. So why am I gonna go and look at one more individual?
A brown thrasher that's lost and out of its range, right? When you've seen them in New England or wherever.
And like the number doesn't. In the big year, the number was fun, even though I didn't completely maximize for it. But the number doesn't. I don't really care too much about.
And what was your final number in your ABA big year that you didn't even care? Just like,
761.
761 without even caring. I mean, there were,
Oh no, that number I did care about. I mean, I could have done more things to bring it up higher, but that I did care about that number. But I don't care about my county lists.
But you didn't care about that big year list enough to be like, jumping on a plane because someone found a code 4, code 5 rarity in some obscure spot.
Much more about birding all the habitats of the U.S.
Yeah. Well, and again, I find, your discussion in the previous meeting, which, I will link to that from the webpage for this meeting at carpbirdwatchers.org. As I listened to you explain your motivation and why you did that big year and how specifically you chose to do that big year, it just made so much sense. Like I found myself going, yes, that is how to do an ABA big year. I didn't think that before, I didn't realize, but it's like, no, that makes perfect sense. That's the best way to do it. I don't know if we've received any, looks like we don't have any questions from chat. I assume, Tom, no one's, okay. Well, everybody's just so in awe of your abilities that they don't know what to say. They're starstruck. Thank you again for participating in this. Thank you for all your many contributions to the local birding community. And, you just touched on a few of them really quickly. And, I know, from talking to you and using those tools, you put a lot of effort into those tools. And you put a lot of effort into the Santa Barbara Christmas count. You put a lot of effort into this Kiama birding survey. So just, on behalf of the community, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks for all that you've done. It's
thanks.
very much appreciated.
Yeah, it's been fun.
All right, well, I guess we'll close up the meeting then. See some of you on Saturday. I just now realized I scheduled this weekend's outing for the day I'm going to be in Cuyama doing the the spring bird survey. I will not see you at Santa Monica Creek on Saturday, but Tom and Laurel, will you be able to be there? And okay, so you have your choice. You can go to Santa Monica Creek and see fun, exciting birds locally, or you can go to the Cuyama Valley and drive for a couple hours and see fun, exciting birds out there. Either way, you should be out there seeing fun, exciting birds on Saturday because they're out there to be seen. All right, well, thank you everybody very much. Again, thank you, Linus, and I'll see you guys somewhere on Saturday. Okay, bye.